The whistle has blown and we're into extra time. I'm joined by Jeff Eisenband, PGA Tour broadcaster that you might know as the play-by-play guy for PGA Tour Live. How you doing, Jeff?
Well, I know you, Harry, as my boss at WNUR Sports back in the day, or producer, director, broadcaster extraordinaire, calling Big Ten athletics. So I feel like I need to let people know that, because I was listening to this you sent me the podcast in advance, and just hearing your tones once again on the mic was soothing.
That's so nice. I mean, our Hort that year, if you want real dulcet tones, you want the real full works, you got to go listen to Sammy Levitt call games for the Padres. He's got the voice. I might have been up there, but he has the golden Northwestern voice. Go listen to him. But it's good. We worked together, Northwestern. We had a little show called NNN Sports. Sports Night was the name of the show itself. NNN Sports was the broader, I guess, like umbrella corporation. Mm-hmm. We also did some sports in the news. And I managed it the best I could while Jeff was there. And I'm sure that I did some great, we did some great things while we were there that were seen by, 6 or 7 people late at night on local access channels.
Exactly. Yeah. We were doing TV production together. We were doing radio together. We were doing actual live sports, which kind of brings us here today.
Yeah, and I mean, so the first thing you did mention hearing the episode, but this is my first question I always ask. Did you know this story before you heard the podcast?
I didn't. And like you said, I work in golf. I'm a broadcaster for the PGA Tour. So, sometimes in any sport that we work in, right, we're supposed to know every single thing that's ever happened. And if we don't, then we're a hack. But I did not know all this. Now, I will say this. Golf is a sport that I am openly very Wikipedia reliable on. So it's one of the names, Eben Byers, that I had, or Eben Byers, that I had seen, but didn't know the context. It's one of those things where the U.S. Amateur is a tremendous deal in the history of the game of golf. And you go back to the early days and you see his name pop up a few times, but don't think kind of twice about it. It's just one of those late 1800s, early 1900s names. You go, oh, well, no one would ever be named, no one would ever be Ebenezer going by Eben today. But I did not understand the full context of his life.
Yeah, and I mean, the middle name, I think, is also important. It's McBurney, which is great. He doesn't go by that a lot, but occasionally he is referred to as E.M. Byers. And moreover, it is a family name. His father was also McBurney as a middle name, which is wonderful. But yeah, it's the golf. You said like, people expect me to know all the golf. This, I mean, 100 years. It's more than 100 years ago now, and it feels like that kind of era of sports, pretty much across the board, is less well known. And people are starting to kind of drop those players that they in their memory. But yeah, like Eben Byers, he would have not only been known as a golfer, like a really good one, he would have been known as like a billionaire at the time. He's a millionaire, but a billionaire at the time. And so that boggles my mind.
There's also, and hopefully I can add some context to him being a U.S. Amateur champion, right? The U.S. Amateur still exists today. It is not close to the prestige of the U.S. Open, but in the early days of golf and the USGA, which still runs the U.S. Open and U.S. Amateur today, they founded both of those events. They were originally played in the late 1800s on the same course in back-to-back days, and the U.S. Amateur was the bigger event. Now, you may say, well, why would that be where the amateur event was bigger than the pro event? There weren't that many pros back then. So the U.S. Open itself was essentially for, and you guys mentioned this a bit in the podcast, but for what we would now call PGA professionals. The individuals that get paid to give lessons, to run golf shops, to are more instructor base. That those were the early, it was kind of a badge of honor that if you ran a country club, you were kind of the head professional. Then you were a pro, you got paid, and you represented that club in the U.S. Open. But the U.S. Amateur would be open to all, kind of the way we think of the U.S. Open today as being open to all. So the U.S. Amateur was that's what people cared more about, because that's how you determined essentially who was the best golfer in a widespread array of people at that time. That's what Eben Byers was doing. And I think also, if I may, Harry, Dave Revson is a guy who we know from the Northwestern sphere, from the BTN, Big Ten Network sphere, who wrote a book recently about the history of college football. And I heard him speak, and it's something that has stuck with me about college athletics around this time, which Eben Byers went to Yale. The Ivy Leagues were the top dogs in almost every sport. And it was all about prestige and all about, there were no scholarships necessarily, but the seeds of scholarships were budding in terms of how can we get this guy who might not be to Yale or Princeton or Dartmouth standards, but how can we somehow get them into the university to represent us? Because if I'm Yale, beating Harvard in football is bigger than anything else at this time. You know, that was, and that was all amateur athletics. There wasn't that draw of pro athletics. You know, sports were more of a hobby. So when it comes to golf and Eben Byers, sports was, you know, kind of the same way today. If you're the club champion at your local country club or golf club, there's a prestige that goes with, you can walk into the grill room and people maybe will be willing to buy you a drink because you're the man at that local sort of, in that local sort of group of people. That's what being the U.S. Amateur champion was to the small but budding golf community in the early 20th century.
Yeah, and this was the time where they were building a ton of golf courses, right? Because, you know, obviously golf is a game that's almost completely determined by the course itself.
Yeah,
it's different in every course, and all the courses here, as we said in the podcast, were like the first ones in Yale. Like these were just right before Byers showed up.
Yeah,
were 3 holes set up by some guys who were really excited about golfing, and they literally just dug small holes in the ground and started playing with clubs that they made themselves. And that the fact that, you know, Byers had that Mountain Resort Golf Club that he was a part of, that he won the 2 tournaments at, and that he was kind of always as a elite child being ferried, you know, between New York and Pittsburgh and going through that kind of area that's like lower New England. He had the opportunity to play a lot of courses, which is something that a lot of people didn't have at that time, because later in the episode I talk about him being driven to his amateurs. The national amateur. And that was like cars. If you imagine Mr. Toad's Wild Ride, that is the type of car he was being driven in. It was like bicycle tires on the side. The headlamps were literally lamps that you lit and they were fire. And that's how you could see in the dark if you were driving in the dark, which I would not recommend. And, you know, a lot of them didn't have doors. Almost all of them didn't have roofs. That was the kind of, so you weren't necessarily going to be a person who went to a lot of different golf courses. You were much more likely to be the person who's the pro at your local golf course, where you are, you know, the guy. You probably helped set up the course. You probably make, or at least source the clubs, because everybody had to have their own clubs, and there wasn't limits on what kind of clubs you can have. So you could have a bag full of whatever you wanted. And, you know, that was golf at the turn of the century. It's really interesting.
I was thinking you were talking about Mashies and Niblicks, and yes, like there was no today. We're talking right now. I know this will come out in a bit, but the Open Championship is happening, which is the oldest major championship. But at the same time, it's not. You know, now every club gets checked before every player's golf ball. Every little inch has to adhere to certain guidelines, which at the time, you look at someone like Eben Byers, and I'm sure his talent was immense, but he probably could create the best equipment. He obviously could get the best instruction as a kid if he'd like. He had the best access to, at the time, the best resources, the best access to actually practicing golf, because we're talking about something, again, that was a hobby, that was, an interest to people. We're about, when Eben Byers wins in 1906, we're less than a decade away from Francis We Met, which is winning the U.S. Open, the greatest game ever played, the Shia LaBeouf movie, which is an example of, and that was the U.S. Open, not the U.S. Amateur, but of someone who was a caddy at the country club in Brookline, Mass, where the tournament was being played. That's an underdog story of someone who was practicing when they would get off work and trying to, beat sundown, and a much more heartwarming story than Eben Byers being, like you said, a billionaire hair who is the best golfer on the planet, arguably at the time, because they have resources that everyone else who has a full-time job does not.
Yeah, and I mean the practicing,
and Yale, and you mentioned Yale, of course. Well, having access to Yale and those resources was something that at the time, from an amateur athletics, from a college athletics perspective, would have been extraordinary and unique.
Yeah, and I mean, Yale was doing it before they even had a course. So they had one of the first 18-hole golf courses in America. They had the first collegiate club and the first collegiate team, and those are different because the club is just people who enjoy golf. The team is the people who compete. But I wanted to ask you about this. So there was that little story about the game that the seniors were playing before they had the golf course, where they would take hockey sticks and tennis balls and set up little holes around campus and just kind of whack it around and play what I think of as urban golf, essentially. Should we bring that back? I feel like we should bring that back.
It sounds like it's like what Ultimate Frisbee now is stereotypically on college campuses. That's what that was. I think, right, it's interesting things coming full circle. And at the time, this was very elitist, right? These are the kids at Yale, the kids of the youth of the richest who were practicing on the nicest early golf clubs before coming to Yale and creating their own thing. And they're so untouchable that the administration isn't going to, slap them on the wrist if they cause any troubles. The irony is, right, today, golf is becoming more accessible than ever before. And the way that you get people to access the game is to put it in smaller terms, where you don't have to show up and play a 450-yard par 4, but you can show up to Top Golf, you could show up to mini golf, you could show up to a pitch and putt and have that opportunity. And that's why you're seeing more and more par 3 courses and pitch and putts pop up in the U.S. right now, because there is that sort of shrinking of the game to appeal to early golfers. So yeah, I mean, look, I look at some of these. We went to school in the Midwest at Northwestern, which, by the way, is one of the top college golf programs in the country, which is an underdog story in itself coming from Chicago. But you look at some of these SEC schools that have practice facilities, that have gigantic facilities that are being built for the college golf teams. It's a big investment for teams where you only have 6 players play per week and maybe 10 to 12 players in the actual team. And they're being made accessible to students when they're not being used by the college teams, which I think is kind of a little bit to your question. It's sort of, hey, how can we get college kids to casually play around campus? These are happening, especially in warm weather locations right now.
Yeah, and
not Yale.
Well, right now it's warm weather. Usually it's not. But in order to get the kids out to and adults out to this to the original golf course and still pretty late into it, they actually really wanted to get them essentially off campus so they didn't hit tennis balls into really rich people's faces. And so what they did was they built a trolley system. There was a trolley system that actually would take people from Old Town, which is like the middle of where Yale is, right, all the way out to the golf course. And in fact, that trolley system was only relatively recently taken up. Obviously, now we just use buses and cars. But the tracks and the kind of raised tracks are still near my house. So I can go outside and just like see where the tram used to be. The golf course is relatively close to here. I could walk over to it and play it. It is really nice. And it is a really important golf course.
You're talking about Yale.
Yes.
I know that the official course was made after Eben Byers was there, but Yale is the standard for the college golf course, which tons and tons of universities have tried to replicate since then, going way back, early 20th century to as recent as now. Major schools like Ohio State, Georgia, come to mind right away as places that have built these courses that become, we could talk about this from two angles, right? From an alumni base, from the universities love them as ways to give back to alumni, to give back to students who have access, to keep alumni nearby. There are alumni that I was just at the Ohio State Golf Club where, there's some, maybe they would stretch to other places in Ohio, but they don't want to leave their golf course access in Columbus. So they're happy to live, closer to Columbus than to Cleveland or to Cincinnati. And then there's an aspect of actually creating talent, like we're talking about, right? That, college athletics were so competitive back then, and they're still so competitive now. And if you can give the resources to your athletes on a readily basis right down the road, that's incredibly, useful. I just want to, mention just with the Yale course too, it was just renovated, kind of a little bit of a restoration to its original appeal. The Yale golf course, I believe it's open to the public for something crazy like $300, $350 a pop. Much cheaper if you were a Yale alum or Yale student, but it draws people to come. Like there's an aura about it. And it's something about the school, like when people are, considering Yale, maybe more for grad school than for undergrad, it definitely factors in.
Yeah, and the original, so the original Yale golf course, the one that you're thinking of, the one this 1920 was established in 1920. Yeah. That was the third different golf course that the Yale students used. There was the one that was essentially the Yale course, the first one that was built in the Northeast. And then there was the one over in North Haven, which was nearby. And it was essentially for people who wanted to play golf without being harassed by college students, kind of being college students all over the place.
And there's reason to believe that Eben Byers would just go to class and play golf every day, play more golf when he was at Yale than when he was home because of that access.
Yeah. There are tons of descriptions of him in his early life, more than most people that I look up, because he was so rich. Everybody knew he was going to be the heir to the Byers fortune. And so every single one of them, they mentioned the two things. One, that he was constantly outside playing golf and other sports. He was a trap shooter too. He did a lot of country club sports. And then also that he was constantly chasing the ladies, which ultimately may have been his downfall, certainly more than the golf. But
certainly sounds that way.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Radiator. I know this falls outside of your normal purview, but on the tour, do people do weird health things? Do they have these rituals? Obviously, none of them are drinking irradiated water. Yeah. We hope.
Yeah.
But what is the weirdest kind of like health thing that you've seen somebody do?
Well, so I'll put this real quick. For decades, golf was not a sport where the health conscious was at the forefront. Sure. When you think about the John Daly's of the world, when you think about, even I wouldn't say Jack Nicklaus and Arnold Palmer were beacons of, fitness. Gary Player was. So Gary Player was, and he's now still playing golf at 91, I believe. And he would tout for years and years and years, fitness. And people looked at him like, what is this guy talking about? And when Tiger Woods came around in the late 90s and was going to the gym regularly and working on his cardio and working on his body and was able to lengthen the realm of his game because of both the muscular and the cardio shape that he was in, people looked around, they said, oh, wait, we probably need to keep up with this guy. And it took some time that all of a sudden, more and more athletes started to play golf, or I should say golfers became more athletes because they saw what Tiger was doing. And, I talked to some former pros that we'll talk about in the 2000s. There would be parties on Monday and Tuesday night at events if you missed the cut on Friday night. The partying aspect of the PGA Tour has gone away because these players look at their bodies as temples where they really, during the season, try to keep everything as pure and fresh as possible, right? And it sort of hit this crazy point in 2020 when Bryson DeChambeau came back from COVID and had gained like 30 pounds, it looked like, between probably not just during COVID, but going back from the fall the year before where he started to bulk up, where he said, I'm just going to create this protein-infused body where I'm just going to have protein shakes, protein bars, protein, and I'm going to hit the ball farther than everyone else. My body is going to be able to withhold the 4-day, really 7-day weeks on the PGA Tour better than anyone else. And it kind of worked for like a year and a half there, where he came out and just was out driving everyone, was hitting the ball to a degree that they had to he won the U.S. Open, bringing it back to the USGA championships in 2020 at Winged Foot down the road from me, where he just was able to just mash his ball as far as possible, find it in the rough, near the green, get up and down and win the whole thing. That the sport, almost every player looked around and said, we have to change because if this guy's hitting it that far, we have to get more length. We have to get more fitness in to compete with this. Now, Bryson's body broke down a little bit and he had to reinvent himself to kind of not go 150%, but just go 100% at that. But you've seen more gluten-free diets. You've seen more supplements. You've seen more, there was a story last year, Ben Griffin, who's not the biggest guy out on tour, he spent time he quit golf for 3 months and worked as a mortgage lender, and he looks more like a mortgage lender than a golfer. He played an event last year, a playoff event. He had a terrible front nine, amazing back nine. He said after that he had actually accidentally overdosed on his creatine supplement that he was doing and was so shaky during those first 9 holes that he couldn't putt. And it's kind of this feels more like an early 20th century story, someone who would have like Radioactive or something like that. But he just creatine is something that's used. It's a legal substance that can be used by golfers that are trying to kind of get that protein boost. But he took too much by accident and could barely function. So it's out there, these things that golfers are definitely trying more than they would have 30 years ago to find those supplemental advantages.
Yeah, and it's funny that you mentioned the fact that like he misread how much creatine he was putting in his body, because the FDA at this time, they had no power, and it was the Federal Trade Commission, the FTC, that was actually like trying to get these things shut down. It's not because you had it in it, it's because you misrepresented it somewhere on the packaging. But the funny thing is, their powers were limited as such, where their main job was making sure you had enough radiation. Like the biggest problems they had was that somebody would claim that like this is this amount of radioactive. Mm-hmm. And they would step in and go, it's not that radioactive. It is radioactive, but it's not as radioactive as you claim it is. And so you'd think that this governing body would be like, hey, maybe we shouldn't have radioactive suppositories and radioactive face cream and radioactive toothpaste. But no, they were actually stepping in there and going like, no, see, you said you had 3 microcuries. You only have 2. That's false advertising. We're going to have to shut you down.
When I was listening kind of to this part of the podcast, I was thinking to myself 2 things. One, American capitalism, right? Like the drug companies and everyone doesn't want, and this is around the Industrial Revolution. We're coming toward, like you said, we're in the Roaring '20s. No one wants to be the Debbie Downer that shuts anything down. Like what financial incentive does anyone have? But that's kind of the job of the DEA or whatever you talk about the different organizations at the time and whose jurisdiction this fell under, and it was just that part was interesting to watch. And then kind of the second is just sort of the Wild West of pharmaceuticals at that time that I had not necessarily thought about. And I started to do I did a little research last night. The woman, Cullen, I think was her last name, right? The founder of radiation. The woman Marie Curie. She's held in very high regard. You look at sort of her history, and she wasn't really blamed for this. William J.A. Bailey, you mentioned, is kind of the guy who is ridiculed, and his legacy will forever be remembered as a quack, whether he thought he was a quack or not at the time.
And he certainly didn't.
But
the man was into his radiation.
Yeah,
the man enjoyed it.
Well, it was a different time too that you were able to kind of do that. You didn't have to have all these degrees. Things didn't have to go through everything. And it's great that the United States has gone toward a world where, hey, we're going to review everything. And even if someone can make a lot of money here, we're going to make sure that people aren't dying. I think that's an important part. But it did kind of remind me a little of like what social media is going through right now, where there are some clear, I have gotten into the Twitter world of I can review community notes. Like I've applied and I can help police community notes, but it's overwhelming because when I open Twitter right now, half of what I see has a pending community note, which means you don't see it, but I see that someone is saying this is AI or this isn't real or this is this. And I'm going, oh my God, it's because it's impossible. I don't have the time to vet and fact check all of these things. Like I try sometimes with the sports, when it's something in my realm and I notice something and there's a community note sitting there, I'll review it and sign off on it. But there's so much. But right now, right, we look at the world of social media and it's not just Twitter, it's Facebook, it's Instagram, it's TikTok. The tech companies don't want to stop this gravy train right now. They're making so much money. They don't want to anger some of their most important users who might be sharing fake information. But you can see based on Radiator what happens when you let people just run rampant, making money on something that is putting the general public in danger.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's always got a little bit of the grain of truth that makes it so that it's not this, so that everybody doesn't know that's an outright lie or that's like obviously bad. So another thing that William J.A. Bailey does at this time is he does go full bore in radiation. He's very into radiation, but he's also into endocrinology. And endocrinology was brand new. They had just invented synthetic insulin, or they had just realized the purpose of insulin, what it does. So they were finally able to get people who had diabetes and who were doomed to die slow, terrible deaths before this. They were able to give them, I think at the time it was pig insulin, and they would live. They would not die, and they would feel relatively good as long as they got the insulin. And so that's the real basis of part of what he was thinking. Now, he said the endocrine system was responsible for not aging, and that if you blasted radiation into your various endocrine glands all over your body, that they would not stop producing endocrine or change their production, and you'd be able to essentially live forever.
Sure.
So that got a little weird, but it is really interesting that those two, he did take real scientific advances, the real radiation that they were working through, figuring out what it actually did, because again, it's brand new. They had only discovered radium at when Byers was in college at Yale. And so they didn't really know what it did all the way, and they were discovering that. And then, endocrinology is something that actually does have a really wide and important use in your body. It's just at this point they had just no idea. He kind of took those and ran with them and said they do things that they didn't do, and that's what ended up to not only Radiator, but he also I have this as a short that's coming out, a short video that'll come out during the podcast. He also had something called the Radiendocrinator, which is imagine, if you will, a small puck with mesh on one side and radium dipped paper in that puck. So it is shooting radiation out of the mesh side of the puck. It came with a band that you were supposed to wear either across your chest, at your belt, or my favorite, in your jockstrap.
I had a hunch that was what was coming.
Yeah, it was not great. So he not only did he have people drink radioactive water, he also recommended that you put a radioactive puck, and in the words of the advertisement of the time, directly against your scrotum, which I do not recommend. I cannot stress this enough. Don't do that.
Can I also? I think to tie back a little to sports.
Sure, sorry.
But I think it's involved with that. Is we see a lot of performance enhancing drugs in sports right now by athletes at the end of their careers, right? There's that feeling of, I need to stay in I want to stay in the fight a little bit. I want to stay in the battle. How can I get how can I still compete? Robinson Cano is a name that comes to mind as a player who was late in his career. A-Rod obviously was, kind of the second time was late in his career. In tennis, it's happened a few times. Maria Sharapova, Martina Hingis, I think Simona Halep was docked a couple years ago. Sort of the players that are, whether they admit that they kind of knew what they were doing or not, they're trying to find supplements. They're trying to stay in. So one thing that I thought was interesting was Eben Byers won the 1906 U.S. Amateur. But he played, he didn't qualify for the match play portion, but he tried. He was in the stroke play portion in 1920 and then again in 1926. He didn't play from 1921 to 1925, but he still played in 1926, which makes me wonder how much of the Radiator was also in the back of his mind, competing. I guess he would have been, if my math is right, he would have been 46 competing in that last U.S. Amateur that he teed it up at, trying to stay in, trying to keep an athletic prowess, trying to compete with players half his age at the time. You mentioned Radiator kind of being something in the pod is something that could help with everything. And I think that was probably a man of his stature, of his wealth, just trying to anti-age and stay both athletic and, like you said, bedroom fit. I think it wasn't, there are many reasons why he was probably grinding Radiator.
Yeah, and I mean, I think you really hit the nail on the head. It was the William J.A. Bailey's claims that that if you renewed your endocrine system, you would stay young forever. You'd be youthful and vigorous.
That was the best part of the pod, I think.
Yeah, that was what he was. I mean, that's what Byers was chasing more than anything. So let's talk a little bit about Byers' golf game. I want you to compare him to some guys on the tour now. Ooh. Byers was known for his dramatic comebacks, right? Became a thing he was absolutely known for, playing kind of dreadful on the front nine and really bringing it together on the back nine or across two, having a bad first 18 and then having a much better second 18. Which player on the tour is the most known for their dramatic comebacks?
Well, I mean, that sounds like Jordan Spieth right off the bat in terms of just erraticness, right? And also entertainment. Spieth seems like a much better guy than Eben Byers. I want to be very clear about that. But I think that sort of hey, you don't know what you're going to get. You might see this guy's going to go for it. So you might see the most electric, entertaining golfer that you've ever seen, or you might see a dramatic crash out. I think there is, I mentioned Bryson a little bit too. There's probably some Bryson to him too in terms of being a showman. in terms of being something that people would have wanted to show up just to see in person. But I don't know. I mean, it's there's seeds of so many athletes. I also don't want this to take away from their skill, but I was thinking a little bit from the women's tennis side. Jessica Pegula and Emma Navarro have gotten a lot of. There's been a lot of conversation around them over the last few years. They are outstanding players who also are the offspring of billionaires that probably had some good access. Obviously had to put in the work, as Eben Byers had to do. Not every rich kid was winning the U.S. Amateur, but I think that this is not a negative. It's not a slight as much as he had access and he made the most of it to become arguably, like I said, the best golfer on the planet for about a 3 to 5 year period.
Definitely. And I mean, so you talked about him being, rich while he was playing, which is something that I think is interesting, because you almost imagine like, oh, well, he became rich later in life because he had to wait for everybody to pass on in this case. But no, by 29, he was super rich, and he was the head of an ironworks by the time he was 24, the same year, I believe, that he was runner-up in his second in 1904 in the amateurs. So one of the things that that I didn't get to put in the podcast, and I'm really glad I get to bring it out here, is that not only did he show up at his 1906 amateurs in a car, in an automobile, very big for the time, when he stepped out, he was wearing knickerbockers. He was, and this was big enough to be in the newspaper. They talked about this for 3 whole sentences about how he's wearing these short pants, and that everybody's very excited, and he's like, he's wearing the fashionable pants. Who is the fashionable? Who's like the fashionable golfer who's bringing it forward?
Ooh. My mind just goes to Jason Day right now, who I wouldn't call necessarily fashionable, but his provider, Malvin Golf, is fashionable. As we speak, it's what's today? Tuesday, the Open Championship. He's in a full camo outfit right now for his practice round. So it's almost more the providers than the players. The other guy that comes to mind, Keith Mitchell, whose nickname is Cashmere Keith, he works with his clothing provider. He actually helps design the clothes because he wears cardigans. He wears big button-down shirts. Payne Stewart in the 90s was the guy who wore knickers, who wore the driver, kind of the hat that Bryson DeChambeau and some others, Harry Hall, have worn more recently. He also had a deal at one point with the NFL where he would wear the team gear at the time, the polos of that team. When if he was close, like if he was playing in Chicago, he'd wear Bears clothes during the week, or if he was, in New York, he'd wear Giants and Jets. So that's a little bit of that. It's funny because I almost wonder if knickerbockers would be allowed today because they don't go all the way down. Joggers are in now, which is kind of the modern knickerbocker, you could say. But this would have been a big deal this is a time where people were wearing suits and ties to play golf. So showing up in anything that was not kind of your standard, people looked essentially like they were going to temple or church or going to a wedding at the time. So showing up with something different was a massive, oh my God, look at this competitive advantage this guy's going to have. His pants are boot cut. They're not going to be getting in the way of his swing, which also tells me that he took the game seriously and to the point that you've been saying, showman, ladies' man, wants his name in the newspaper, wants to be more than he's not just showing up and hitting fairways and greens. He's showing up to create a spectacle, which was part of why he was a socialite, why he was in the news. And you know what? If you can back it up and you can win, go for it. Would he have won more? Maybe if he focused just on the golf, who knows? But at the time, to go to the point about amateur athletics and why someone was playing golf, they were marketing themselves too. They weren't just playing just to win. I think that everything, when you look at Eben Byers' life, coming from an industrial family, coming from a socialite family, it was about more than just birdies and bogeys.
Yeah, and I mean, golf really was a tool for him to advance his business with everyone, and that, I think, was borne out in the fact that, he does play as he gets older, but there is that 5-year gap where he was doing other things. He was physically able. That was before he injured himself on the train. So he was, he could have played and was busy doing other things like, I don't know, smelting iron, I guess. Watching other people smelt iron. So
I don't know how much. I would love a separate podcast in terms of how active, how hands-on was this guy as a heir to the sort of throne. Like, was he actually, working, or was he just collecting checks and yelling at people and hiring and firing people? I think that would be a whole other conversation.
Well, one of the things that gets a little lost is that he was chairman of Westinghouse Electronics. So this is like
Who could
really
forget?
early in electronics. So he was minimally helping make decisions that in that form, like, cause like iron is iron. I imagine it's once you get your company large enough, they've got enough resources, they're going to be a good provider. And his father was, of course, did the bituminous coal smelting iron ore, which increased production. So he probably stayed put on that. But the Westinghouse Electronics is where I think he probably did most of his leadership, business leadership. So earlier you talked a little bit about COVID, the times. I'm going to draw a line between that and the fact that Byers was radioactive when he died, to the point where they had to bury him in a lead line coffin, right? He was that radioactive. That also means he was that radioactive when he was alive. If you would get near him, he would set off a Geiger counter. Now, they never checked this, but this is, it goes, the fact that he is alive is not stopping the radiation from seeping out of his body. He probably was radioactive while he played some golf, some amount of golf. Not his best golf, but some golf. How is there anything on the tour right now that would stop a player who is, radioactive, or, like I said, drawing it back to COVID, like if somebody was like contagious, would they be like, hey, you need to, like, is there a protocol for that?
Well, first of all, they use metal clubs today, right? So it'd be that is something that is they used wood clubs back then, right? What would have happened if they were starting to forge metal irons? Would he not have been able to play? Would he have had to have played with wood? Like, what would have happened? What happened when Eben Byers in his late years touched metal or iron? Like, I would have loved to understand that a little more. Look, when COVID happened, right, there was players had to, the best story is when John Rahm in, I guess it would have been 2021, so kind of a year after COVID, if you tested positive, you had to immediately leave the golf course. He was leading the Memorial Tournament in Columbus significantly through 3 rounds, and he had to withdraw before the final round. Did that send him on a spiral that led him to live golf? That's a story for another day. But that at least pushed someone off the course. I don't know. There's not enough right now that I can think of. We're dealing with a certain bowel parasite in the U.S. Who knows what we're about to see there. I don't think that there is something radioactive to the touch that's an issue right now for golf, but I think for all sports, we'll see if there's COVID was an airborne virus, right? Or still is. It is interesting if there was something by touch, because golf is a sport where you're touching a lot of things, but you're also kind of touching only your own equipment. Basketball, everyone's touching the same basketball, right? Most sports, everyone's touching the same ball. Golf, other than you don't, and your caddy kind of grabs the flagstick. If you're the player, you don't ever really have to touch the same things as your competitors, which makes it a unique sport in that regard.
Yeah, I guess his caddy would have had to mind it
It's like, are you getting your caddy? Caddy. If Eben Byers was playing at a later time where his caddy was grabbing his clubs and balls, they would be the one most at risk to, I guess, kind of becoming like the Spider-Man in a way, that radioactive touch, right? Isn't Spider-Man sort of the remnants of this radioactive era?
Yeah, I mean, Spider-Man was originally bitten by a radioactive spider. Later, it became like DNA altered spider, but originally it was just a radioactive spider. I don't know, the spider decided to hang out near a cooling tower or something and became radioactive. So yeah, what we really should have had was a radioactive superhero called Golfman, and I don't really know what powers he would have besides being radioactive, but I think we're missing out.
A club would be sort of like his, almost like I'm imagining like a Harry Potter witch, sort of that spell. A metal club could radioactively, I don't know, maybe it wouldn't be a superhero. I'm thinking more of a villain.
Yeah. Or the club could be like Mjolnir, the Thor's hammer.
There you go.
Just have like all kinds. He'd be able to like attract it to him. That'd be great. So I have a couple more questions. One of them I think is this one is, I saved it for one of the last ones because it's just fun. So William J.A. Bailey, we talked about his weird gadgets, his weird radioactive medicines. He was a con man. Is there any weird con man golf gadgets that you see people bringing around that you're like, that's not helping. That's just hurting you?
Well, there's a lot. I feel like not from a medicine standpoint, right? But I mean, there's just like, right, there's things that you can do to faces of clubs that are cons, whether it's changing the grooves from rounded to square grooves, different, you'll see someone with a club that's like a 70-degree wedge or something that's not really, if we were really playing in a competition, you'd be like, hey, that needs to be checked. Or it's funny because back to Bryson, and we keep going back to Bryson because he's trying to expand the boundaries of golf right now. He's 3D printing clubs and drivers right now that need to be approved. And you could have a really rich guy who has a 3D printer, right? Just print his clubs right now. And if you're at your local competition and you don't have a USGA official to deem those clubs conforming or not, how do you do that, right? So there's a lot of, it does go back. Look, I'm so happy that the game of golf is more accessible than ever before, and it's something that I take a lot of pride in. But yeah, if you have a lot of money, do you have more resources to go find things like that, to go get the best balls, create the best clubs, get the best sort of contraptions? Last year, the Internet Invitational, which was a Barstool and Bob Does Sports co-run sort of creator tournament that was on tape. There was a scene, this guy used the slope on a rangefinder, which is what you shoot to get your distances. Technically, in competitions that allow rangefinders, that allow you to shoot distance, they don't allow slope, which sort of re-engineers that distance to give you a more accurate number based on the actual slope, height, elevation change. There are some ways that you could still get around cheating in golf, unfortunately. But that, you could argue someone could show up today to a pickup basketball game in shoes that make them jump higher. If you have the ability to create, if you have the resources to create, you can kind of do that. I'm not talking performance enhancers. Like, look, a high school kid could show up on steroids and pitch and blow fastballs by everyone and not get tested. There's always going to be these sort of ways that, especially at the amateur level, you can unfortunately cheat, is the best way to put it.
Sure.
Get a competitive advantage.
Yeah, and I like the idea, though, of somebody just marketing like really like kind of like obviously bad ones. Like I just the one that goes into my mind is there's like a putter site that I saw where it's like you look straight down and into a thing and it like does a periscope action so that you can see the whole. It doesn't help. I can't imagine it helps, but I like to think of it as like golf things you'd buy out of a Hammaker Schlemmer catalog, and you'd be like, this'll work, and it's not helping. It's hurt. It's
like Instagram ads that I feel like, not to pick on them, but boomers get fooled because it like looks like something that they've been waiting all their life. Oh my God, that's going to save me so much time. That's going to be, and it never is what it seems. Like there are these like you said, there are things, putters. There's ads for putters that are you'll never miss with this putter because look at the lines. You'll know how to line up your putt. I mean, this is, like you said, these glasses that you'll be able to see the line, but it's never, there's always going to be that human error that still exists, even in this tech era, even in this AI era.
Well, you've been exactly as advertised, Jeff. Let me give you some time to tell people where they can find you. Where do you want people to come and look for Jeff Eisenband?
Yeah, at Jeff Eisenband on social, JeffEisenband. If you like golf and you subscribe to ESPN Plus, you can watch PGA Tour Live. If you like, if you'd rather listen on the radio, Sirius XM, PGA Tour Channel 92. I also call live golf there, and I'm one of the hosts for The Drop, which airs on Monday nights on 7 p.m. on Golf Channel, which is a roundup of everything going on the PGA Tour.
Well, that sounds awesome, and with the Open coming up this weekend, I hope everybody goes out and gives you a listen. This has been great. I hope you had a great time too. Until next time, keep playing.